And we are live.
Okay,
We're recording.
awesome.
So, hi, I'm Dia, and you guys are watching Dianosaur. This is T-Rex and Tacos, and today we have author Jamie Jackson, author of The Sparrow and the Oak Tree, with us. So, hi, Jamie.
Hi.
So, would you like to tell us a bit about your book?
Okay. So it is a enemies to lovers fantasy romance retelling of Tristan and Isolde. Um, and it's got zombies.
Cool. So, you're a part of SPFBO 9. So, how does that feel?
Oh, well, it's the second year that I've done it. Because I entered my urban fantasy superhero book Fear and Fury last year. It did get cut, so I'm used to waiting to hear back on how it's doing. So I know that my book is in the Fantasy Book Critic blog this year. Um, so it's exciting, but there's also a lot of waiting involved.
Yeah, the phase one must be very difficult, right? You don't know when the announcement will be done for cuts and semi-finalists. So that is very difficult, I feel.
Yeah. I'm not the most patient person, so
Okay. So what do you feel makes your book different from the other SPFBO entries?
I don't think there's a whole lot of fantasy romances that get entered into SPFBO. I think it tends to be a lot of grimdark, a lot of epic fantasy. Um, I don't see a lot of urban fantasy in it all that often as well, but I think there are more urban fantasies that have been entered this year. So,
Okay. So have you seen any change in the way your book is being perceived by people after you entered this competition?
um, I don't know if there's been a difference in the way it's been perceived, but I think it's definitely gotten more attention because I saw a increase in the number of people who added it to their want to read list on Goodreads. So uh, I think it definitely brings attention to the books that get entered into it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the major draw of this competition that people get to know about your book. So, for example, like with your book, I had no idea about it, and then you approached me, and I was like, reading it, and I was like, this is so good. And
Yeah.
I would have missed out on such a great book if it hadn't been for this competition.
Yeah.
So, that's a great thing about this. So, have you read any of the other books that are in this competition?
I've read Beautiful Undone by Melissa Polk, and I had read that before they entered it into the competition. And it is beautifully written. And when the reviewer for SPFBO called it a fever dream, that is incredibly accurate because it reads like a fever dream, like like Poe and The Fall of the House of Usher. It just has that quality to it, and it is so well written.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, definitely check that
Interesting.
one out.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay, what made you want to be a writer? What was your writing journey like?
Um, well, I read a lot as a kid, but I think what really inspired me to be a writer was Star Wars. Just the epic story, um, and I loved it as a kid. Like the original trilogy, just holds a special place in my heart. And so I was writing, but not, reliably. I'd never really finished a project until after The Mandalorian came out. And I sat down and said, I want to get back into writing. I want to actually finish a project. And so I did. And then that single superhero story project turned into a 12-book series and this Tristan and Isolde retelling. And I have a Macbeth retelling that's going to be coming out on Halloween. So I'd say it really
I
lit a
really
fire.
recommend it. So, what was your first book?
The first book I wrote, or
The first book you wrote and published?
that would be Fear and Fury. And
Oh,
yeah, this is the
yeah,
first book.
I've seen this around.
Yeah, it's the first book in my urban fantasy superhero series, Adventures of a Villain Leaning Humanoid. So
Oh,
yeah, I have all 12 of the books written. The first 5 are out and available on Amazon. And so, just moving ahead with getting the rest out there.
nice. So, that is urban fantasy. This
Hmm.
one, Sparrow and the Oak Tree, is fantasy romance,
Yep.
and the Magnus one will be
It's going to be
what was the genre?
a dark romantic fantasy. The title is Bound to the Fate of Kings.
Okay. So you have dabbled in a lot of genre.
Yeah.
So which one is your favorite
Um,
to write?
to write on, probably just fantasy romance is probably my favorite. The thing that I like about urban fantasy is that there's a little less world building required because we already know what our world is like. Usually it's based in our own world. So it's easier in that aspect because most people are familiar, they know what to expect. Um, but I do really enjoy some of the aspect of world building when it comes to fantasy romance and that kind of stuff because of the rules that you need to create. Although a lot of my rules with magic tend to be it's magic, and that explains it.
That's a good thing. Like hard magic system, it has its draw, but sometimes it gets too much like science, like four
Yeah,
science or something like. But magic, soft magic, it has its different allure. That's what I feel.
yeah,
So it's a good thing that your magic is, like without rules and all that.
yeah. It's softer. It's a little more chaotic than
Yeah,
magic that has a rigid set of rules. So
yeah, yeah. That's the great thing I would say. So what else about fantasy romance? Like what other aspects of fantasy romance do you find very appealing?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
What other aspects of fantasy romance do you feel appealing?
The characters. I love doing the dialogue between the characters because I like their interactions. I like banter, and you'll notice that a lot of my characters tend to be sarcastic.
Yeah. So, so tell us a bit about the Sparrow and the Oak Tree, the inspiration mostly. Like you said, it's based on the story of Tristan and Isolde, and I don't think many people are aware of what the story is like. So if you would, like explain.
Okay. So full disclosure, I had never read the original tale of Tristan and Isolde until I had started writing this book. Um, and what I did was I basically went to Wikipedia. And so from what I remember is Tristan is sent to basically bring Isolde to his uncle, King Mark, if I remember his name correctly. I'm pretty sure it's Mark because I wanted to sneak in one of those "Oh hi Mark" references, but there ended up being no way to fit that in. Um, and when they board the ship, they're basically tricked into drinking a love potion. And from what I read in some of the other tales, it's like a lust potion. They're tricked into drinking this love potion and immediately fall in love on this journey. But of course, Isolde is supposed to go marry the king, so she goes and she marries the king, and they have this love affair that goes on for years until her husband finds out, and he poisons Tristan, or was it? either he poisons Tristan or his wife. Tristan's wife poisons him. And so Isolde journeys to where Tristan is living to try and save him, but she's too late. Yeah.
Okay.
So the original tale is a tragedy because I believe they both die at the end.
Okay. So, what made you want to write a story based on it?
So when I first started writing the story, it wasn't supposed to be a Tristan and Isolde retelling. It was supposed to be a fantasy horror story. And it went off the rails right from the beginning because my character said, no, we're not doing that. And so I was probably about a third of the way through before I realized this is what I'm writing is a love story. And I had basically unconsciously mimicked the tale. So I just, did some research and went fully into that direction at that point.
I can see the story becoming something horrorish
Mm-hmm.
because of the elements, zombies, and all that.
Yeah.
So, do you see yourself writing that story sometime in the future? The original one that you were writing?
Yeah. Because I kept the zombies. They were supposed to be there from the beginning. Um, and there was supposed to be something wrong with the forest that they were going into. They were going to have to figure out what was going wrong. Um, so I kept those elements of horror, but most of my writing tends to have elements of horror. So which is odd because I basically refuse to watch any horror movies.
Okay, that's fun.
Yeah.
What about horror, like writing horror that makes you want to write it?
Um, I mean, I read a lot of R.L. Stine, like Fear Street as a kid. Was fascinated about tales with vampires and werewolves. Um, and so I read a lot of things that were probably technically horror, but for some reason I won't watch movies for the most part. I mean, I've seen like the classics, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween. um, Alien I would say is definitely sci-fi horror. So I've seen them. I just don't intentionally seek out horror for the most part.
That that's one less known fact about you that the know, audience will get to know. So, uh, okay, do you feel you have fae in the book? Like Tristan is a fae, and what would you say? Like, would you say fae is overdone in book at this point?
Um, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
The fae in fantasy romance, do you think it's been overdone at this point?
Oh, I don't know that it's been overdone. I know that it was certainly a big trend, which I think it's still relatively popular, but it's one of the reasons that I didn't go the usual route with the Fae, which is they usually have a court. There tends to be a lot of them. There's court politics that they play and that kind of stuff, and I didn't want to deal with including that. So I decided I was just going to go in a different direction and say that the Fae just they don't have courts. They live on their own. Um, they aren't social creatures overall. And in the book, they actually abandon their children once they reach a certain age.
Okay, so that was my next question. That how is the fae in your book different from the other books? So,
Yeah. We yeah, just stayed away from the whole, the court of the Fae. Um, and so they pretty much live alone. They don't have family units. Um, they don't really have any Fae kings or queens in this world.
and how would you say the magic works? Like you said, magic is chaotic in your world, but
Mhm.
how would you say, like, is there any, like, this is a specific kind of way you can do a specific kind of magic? Is there something like that?
Yeah, so the Fae-based magic is um, pretty elemental. It tends to be connected to what kind of Fae they are. So obviously, a forest Fae, his magic is related to life and growth, and plants, whereas someone like a metal Fae is going to be able to manipulate things that have to do with the earth, with rock, with metal, um, and create those kind of things. And whereas um, the Fae are steeped in magic all of their lives, human magic in this world weakens as people get older. So they tend to, I think the specific line I put in there was, as their body goes, so goes their magic. So they don't have any old wise wizards in this world, because by that point their magic isn't what it used to be. They don't grow more powerful with age. It leaks away from them.
Okay. And that brings me to next question, which is what is the world building like? Like, how did you create that world?
Um, I just kind of went for medieval. I wanted it to be medieval, and then the world itself just kind of creates as I'm writing. So I'm what's called a pantser, and I essentially just make it up as I go along. There's no outlining for my world building. It just sort of grows as the story does.
Okay, what is a pantser? I have no idea about it.
So um, we as writers, we say there are people who are pantsers, and then there are people who are plotters. And what plotters do is they tend to make outlines for like their characters, for the plot. They have the beats of the story laid out. They know where they're going from point A to point B. And a pantser is someone who sits down and says, I'm going to write a story. And they just start at the beginning, which is point A, and they somehow end up at point Z. And they have no idea how they're going to get there. So
Okay, that's something new that I learned today. Pantser. Okay. Uh, okay, so now we come to the characters. And the characters, there are three characters that are focused on in this book. And how did you come up with such distinct characters?
um, I have no idea. Like they just they pop up in my head. Um, and I knew for the names that I wanted the magic to be connected to knowing somebody's true name. So for their names, I just I based it on their personalities, or on something to do with their physical descriptions. Like for Isolde, people call her Sparrow because she tends to flit around the court. She doesn't settle in one place for long. And Bear, obviously, from his physical description, because he's a big person. He's got the long curly black hair. He's um, intimidating when it comes to his physical stature.
Okay. So who did you imagine, like, who did you picture as, someone playing Bear?
Um, Jason Momoa, I would say,
Oh,
yeah, yeah. He's my fan cast for Bear.
okay. And for Tristan and Isolde?
So Tristan is Ben Barnes. Um,
Ah,
yeah. So I had seen an article on Twitter where Ben Barnes had said something about wanting to do fewer like psychopath roles or sociopath role, like roles where he's not this scheming, conniving character, somebody who's softer. And I was like, I have the perfect cinnamon roll Faye, like just because his overall appearance would be perfect, I think, for Tristan. Um, and for Isolde, I was thinking Elizabeth Olsen, because I think she has great emotional range. Like if you've seen her as Scarlet Witch in uh what was the show? I can't remember the name of the show. Which she has,
Uh,
it's a series for the Scarlet Witch and Vision. Um and her emotional range is just really, really good. Um, I'll remember it like an hour after this interview and be like, ah, but yeah.
yeah. Whenever like you're on the spot, you can't remember the things that you're supposed to say. And the moment it's over, you're like, oh shoot, I should have said that.
Yeah, yeah.
So that happens to me too. Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about Bear. Like you said that the characters just come to you. Bear, what made you want to create a character? Like we usually don't see a third person in a fantasy romance. So, what made you want to create a character like that?
Um, so initially I was thinking that it was going to be Bear and Isolde who were teamed up and having to fight this zombie force. So he was there as the mercenary character from the start, and I wanted him to be a physical character, somebody who goes into the brawls and fights back with a sword and shield and not with magic. I wanted someone who was going to be a very physical character for Bear, because since Isolde was magic based, it seemed to make sense that you would have the two separate uh, skills.
Okay. So, Bear is kind of acting like a mirror to Isolde somehow.
Yeah,
Is
he,
it
he's
so?
kind of, yeah, he's kind of like a mentor slash guardian type of
Right.
character for her. Yeah.
Okay. And so, your characters, they embody tropes but also defy stereotypes. So, how do manage to do that? Like, they are tropey, but they are not stereotypes.
Um. Oh man, I honestly don't know, because I just when I write, I don't aim um for things when it comes to their personality. I just kind of let it flow. Um. So when it comes to stereotypes, um, I'm not trying to aim away from them. Like, I'm happy to lean into stereotypes and cliches, because I think that's the best way to go about owning them. Is if you notice that you've got something that's a stereotype or a cliche, just lean into it, because that's really the only way you're going to be able to make it your own and kind of jump that hurdle of being a stereotype.
Yeah. That's actually a very important thing that you have said, that if your character is resembling a stereotype, just lean into it.
Yeah,
Because if you try to, if you try to make the person consciously different, it will turn out to be something not organic.
yeah.
I feel that. Like, I've read books where it doesn't seem to ring true, the character.
Hmm.
So sometimes stereotypes can be a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes the stereotype is a good thing. Like, um because some of the stereotypes and the cliches exist and they get reused for a reason. And it's because we enjoy those stereotypes and cliches. So trying to defy stereotypes and cliches isn't necessarily going to work.
Your writing, it's really atmospheric. I told you, I think, the first chapter, I was holding my breath. The tension was so high. And how do you create such tension in writing, in prose?
Um, I think I luck into it, really, because um, because I am definitely just that person who just I start writing and I see where it goes. Um, so it it has a certain flow and a certain rhythm to it, and I can tell when I need to stop a scene or move the scene along from whatever is going on because I can feel it start to drag. Um, but like when it comes to building the atmosphere and that kind of thing, I I'm honestly not entirely sure how I managed to do it. I just want to be able to bring the reader into the scene. So I try to describe enough that they can envision it without dragging it down with details.
Exactly. Like what I felt while reading the book was that I could picture everything, but there wasn't any unnecessary detail, like the texture of someone's skin or something like that. So I I had this picture, like it was kind of like watching a movie in my head while reading, and I really liked that.
That's awesome. I think that's one of my favorite things is when a reader tells me that they can see the scene that I set in their head. Um, and I think one of the most important things as a writer is you need to trust your reader to be able to envision what you're trying to tell them. Because I think that's when people end up over describing things because they're not trusting their reader to see it, to form their own vision. And you also need to let your reader form their own image of what's going on.
Definitely. So, okay, we come back to tropes again. What are your thoughts on use of tropes in fantasy romance?
um, I say use them. Like, if there are tropes that you enjoy that you want to include, go ahead. If I think there are cases where you accidentally include tropes, you don't realize that you're including them in the first place just because you don't necessarily know that that is a trope that exists. But you also have readers who they want these tropes. They want to read enemies to lovers. They want to see the only one bed scene. Like, they like reluctant heroes or chosen ones. Readers want that. So there's nothing wrong with continuing to use tropes or intentionally using those tropes.
When do you think it starts going wrong?
Hmm?
Use of tropes. Like, at what point do you think readers get tired of, seeing the tropes over and over again?
Um, I'm sorry. Do you mind
I
repeating
mean,
that?
yeah, maybe I'm not able to, uh, I mean, at what point do you think that readers get tired of a certain trope, like overuse or the same use, or
Yeah. Yes, I think that readers can get tired of certain tropes because, like, for me, I don't read a lot of the chosen one tropes. Like, I know I started with Star Wars and there was this idea that there was this chosen one. Luke is, supposed to be this chosen one. Vader was originally supposed to be the chosen one. That's that's one of the few like chosen one tropes that I do enjoy, simply because I think at some point it did get a bit saturated. Um, and I think that's a trope that people could subvert instead of just following along with the usual, hey, there's this 15-year-old kid in a village and he's been chosen to save the world. So now we have to go through the training montage with his mentor and all that kind of stuff. I would like to see like some subversion of that trope, some moving away from it. But, you know, that's a personal preference for me. There may be people out there who want to see even more of the chosen one trope. Like that is their trope. That's all they want to read. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah. So, so let do you want to talk about your upcoming book, or should we just talk about Sparrow and Dog?
No, we can talk about the Bound to the Fate of Kings if you want to. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because I'm really interested to know more about it.
Yeah.
So it's a Macbeth retelling. Do you want to tell us a bit about it?
Okay, so Bound to the Fate of Kings is a dark romantic fantasy retelling of Shakespeare's Macbeth. It focuses specifically on the three witches, um, and then the character of Macduff. Because one, the witches aren't really big characters in the play. They don't get a whole lot of screen time. They show up at the beginning, they tell Macbeth, hey, you're destined to be king. And then he goes off and does his thing for the majority of the play. And we don't see them again except for the one witch who comes back to tell him about the forest that starts moving, the walking trees. And so it just felt like they didn't get as much screen time as they should, because the witches are literally the characters who set Macbeth on his path. So I wanted to write a story that really focused on them and why they would go to Macbeth and tell him, hey, you're meant to be king. But since I do tend to make everything I write into romance, I had to include Macduff as a main character. So he is the one who ends up doing the majority of the interaction with the witch. Macbeth has become a bit part in his own play, essentially.
Okay. That sounds fascinating. I When is it coming out?
Halloween, because I'm
Oh,
extra like that. It's Macbeth, it's witches. Like it's Halloween
yeah,
is on a
that's the
Tuesday.
perfect time.
Yeah, Halloween is on a Tuesday this year, which is like the usual publication day of the week for new releases. So I couldn't not aim for a Halloween release.
It was meant to be.
Yes,
So
exactly.
I'm so excited for that book to come out. And uh, will you be entering it into the next year's competition, or what are your plans with the book?
Um, I haven't decided yet whether I'll try to enter it into SPFBO 10. I think it'll depend on how much attention it's receiving at that point, because if it's something that's getting lots and lots of attention, I'd rather leave SPFBO for other indie authors, to get that kind of promotion. If I need, if it's doing about the same as my other books in terms of how much attention or traction it's getting, then I probably will enter it into SPFBO 10 just for that promotion.
Okay. So have you considered any other indie competitions that's going on around this time?
Yeah, so I wanted to enter the Book Bloggers Novel of the Year awards for this year, but unfortunately, Sparrow's publication date was not early enough for it to qualify. So I'm hoping to enter the Sparrow and the Oak Tree into that next year, but we'll see
Okay.
how that goes.
Okay. So what has your publishing journey been like? Why self-publish? Why self-pub?
So I initially decided to self-publish because um, I had looked up like what the royalties were in terms of what you would get paid with traditional publishing versus what you would get if you decided to publish it yourself. The royalties themselves are much better doing it yourself, obviously, simply because you don't have any of the middlemen that you have to deal with for, marketing and the agents and all that kind of stuff, but also because it gave me a level of control over my stories that I wouldn't have if I went with traditional publishing. I get to choose my editor. I get to choose all the cover art. Um, I get to say where the story goes. So, that also was a really big draw. And so, I just decided to continue on and doing it. And it's been a lot of fun. Like I've learned a lot of things. I know a lot more about marketing and genre and trends in publishing than I used to. So it's also been a great learning experience.
Thanks. So, if someone were to start publishing, self-publishing, what would your advice be to them?
Let's see. I would say for marketing, focus on the apps that you're good at. If you're better at um, stuff where you shoot off a quick post or two, like you would for Twitter or Threads, go there. If you're great at doing content creation for like videos and photos and stuff, you want to be on Instagram and TikTok. Um, just, to get word out there about your book. Uh, Also, a good editor is key. You want a good editor, and I would recommend. I know that it's not financially viable for everybody, but honestly, I would recommend that you get an editor simply because there are going to be things that you don't see in your story that need clarification, that need to be built up on because you know the story, you know where it's going. Um, Whereas an editor or beta readers, they're going to be able to point out where the story needs to improve.
That's some great advice. So, okay, so your story, Sparrow and the Oak Tree, it has a happily ever after ending.
Yes,
So, which one do you prefer, like sad endings or happy endings?
I prefer happy endings personally. I definitely like the happy ever afters or the happy for nows. Uh, I'm also okay with ambiguous endings where you don't necessarily get all the answers, or bittersweet endings where it seems like the characters are going to be relatively happy, but not everything has worked out perfectly.
Okay. Yeah, I usually prefer the ambiguous ending where you can't tell if they're happy, like what happened exactly at the end.
Mhm.
And that brings me to the spoiler section. Do you mind if we do a spoiler start of your book?
No, spoilers are fine.
Spoilers are fine, no? Okay. So, okay, I'll put up this banner while editing about spoilers. So we can talk about spoilers now. So that ending, oh my god, that ending. I was like, if I hadn't known that it was happily ever after, I would have been like, this is the end. They have died, and I'm so sad. And then that ending would have come, and I would have been like, my god. But I knew it was gonna be happily ever after. I was like, I mean, I don't have words. I don't have words.
Yeah, I that ending is in there because I wanted to make it clear that the ending was happy for at least the two of them. Um,
Yeah.
for the king and his people, not so much.
And also that when Bear made that, uh, found that the mayor was actually a fae. So what was exactly happening over there? The fae was controlling the city.
Yeah. So the idea in the book is that if you have somebody's true name, their real name, the name that they were given at birth, if you have their name and you have magical abilities, you can exert control over them, and in some cases to the point where they're essentially nothing more than puppets. They have no choice in following your commands. So that's what the whole thing with the names was.
Okay. And so the king, like, how did you like? It was very. I was thinking that the king was gonna be the bad guy at the end or something like that. How did you come up with the character, the concept of the king? That
Um,
someone who controls all these people for his own gain, and how is it different from a fae?
so the king is he's definitely human and he has human magic. Um, but because he does have this magic, he essentially used that ability to um, to basically, control the people in his kingdom, in his castle, with his mages and all that kind of stuff. I would say in this world, it's probably pretty traditional for them to have a mage king who has that level of control over his other mages. So yeah.
Okay, and uh, so I mean, this story, this was very like it was not different, but it was also kind of different from other fantasy romans that I've read. I just wanted to tell you that it's an amazing story, and more people should read it. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
I love that. I'm thrilled that you enjoyed it so much. I really am. Um, but yeah, yeah. I personally, I'm biased, but yeah, I love this story. It has a special place in my heart, and it's just thrilling to hear other people love it as much as I do.
Okay. And you mentioned something about the Insta love that people are catching on, that people are talking about how there is this element of Insta love in the story.
Hmm.
So you said that it's a callback to the original myth.
Yes. So in the original myth, Tristan and Isolde are given that love potion. So there is that insta love, insta connection between the two of them that happens through a spell, but it is essentially insta love, even though it is magically created. So I wanted to keep that aspect of it.
And talking about the relationship, how do you think conflict, like how do you created the conflict in their story, in their relationship?
Um, well, I mean, she was technically sent to kill him, so that's a little bit of conflict, but I think that's more conflict for her. Um, and Tristan himself is just he's trying to save himself and his home, so he's, you know, resorting to things he normally wouldn't have done. So yeah, and then of course there's the whole issue where he binds her to him with this promise, and then doesn't tell her at first that their own powers have bound to each other as well.
Okay. So uh, I am all out of questions right now.
Okay.
Do you want to just chat, or do you want to end the video here?
um, I can talk for a couple minutes. Yeah,
Okay. So
before
what
I
are your some favorite fantasy romance?
my favorite fantasy romance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, oh wow. I don't know that I have a favorite fantasy romance because the majority of the books that I've read have been just like regular fantasy and urban fantasy. So fantasy romance is not a genre that I've read in a whole lot, which is it's kind of funny because I ended up writing a fantasy
Right.
romance.
So, who's your favorite author?
My favorite author. Let's see. Um, I, probably R.L. Stein, just because he, I read so many of his books as a kid, so he's just up there as one of my all-time favorites.
Nice. And what is, you said you have watched a couple of scary movies, right?
Yeah, I have watched some scary movies. Um,
So, which one would you recommend?
uh, Alien with Sigourney Weaver is definitely one that I would recommend. Um, Everybody should watch that one. Uh, Also, the follow-up Aliens. Um,
Okay.
the other movies in the Aliens series, uh, I mean, I don't think they're necessarily bad, but the first two movies are my favorite. Um, Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Shining and what is it, Halloween. Those I technically watched with classmates in college because I had taken a Gothic fiction course. And so, as part of the stuff that we did, other than like reading like Dracula and Frankenstein, we watched scary movies as
Oh,
part of yeah. So like we had movie nights where we would get together and we would watch horror movies. To Our professor said it was to pick out the Gothic aspects of these movies, but honestly, I think it was just an excuse for us to get together and watch movies.
that's a nice way to do classwork,
Yeah,
watch
yeah,
a movie.
exactly. And I think writers, like, other than just learning from reading in lots of genres, you should watch lots of genres as well because there's a certain thing you can learn from watching movies in terms of beats and timing and the flow of the story that you can apply to your own writing, and especially with like dialogue. um, Dialogue is hugely important if your characters are going to be speaking back and forth. You need to have a good foundation in how people talk to each other. So movies are an excellent place to see that occurring.
Yeah, dialogue find is something that very few authors can do in a great way,
Hmm.
and it's very difficult, in my opinion, to get get it right,
Yeah.
the banter between two people. And the banter between Sparrow and Oak, Kristen and Isolde in the book, it was very natural, it flowed very well, and I really liked it.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm glad that the banter comes across well. Um,
Yeah,
I would say
I
there's a
think
lot
I
of
tweeted something that the banter is great or something. I think I mentioned it in a tweet or something
yeah.
that while
Yeah. The banter is something that I can say I have personal experience with because my husband and I are both very like sarcastic, snarky people. So we tend to go back and forth with each other. Um, I think it's hilarious because we make sarcastic comments back and forth to each other, and tease each other about things. Uh, so it's a lot of fun, and I think that aspect comes across in my writing.
yeah, that's the fun thing, like the banter.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are at the end of the video now.
Okay.
I am all out of questions, and Jamie must be really tired of me at this point.
No, not tired of you at all.
Okay, so I'm ending the video. Ending the recording here.
Okay.
So, is it okay?
Yeah. Sounds good.